Okay, folks, here we go. Another GED video. This one we're looking at the GED Social Studies test. I'm teacher Mike from Phuket PALS. All right, now for those of you who don't know, you've got 70 minutes to finish the GED Social Studies test, and there are 35 questions approximately. This can vary from state to state, but usually it's in and around 35 questions, so you don't have a lot of time to answer them all. It's only about 2 minutes per question. If you factor in the amount of reading you have to do, the amount of analysing, evaluating, and the rest of it, you have to be really sharp and on top of your game to do well in this test. Now, most of the questions are based on short passages. Okay, these are short paragraphs. They're usually quite dense paragraphs, full of, sometimes it can be quite old English as well, because it might be short, like a extract from a speech from the 19th century or earlier. So sometimes the English can be like old English and be a bit confusing. But you just have to keep calm, read closely, and try and use the context of what's going on and other clues within the text to kind of work out what is being said. Now, also in the social studies test, you'll get diagrams that you have to have a look at, political cartoons, maps, photographs, excerpts from historical documents such as the Declaration of Independence. Okay, now excerpts from the Declaration of Independence come up all the time in this test, so it's a very good idea to Google kind of GED past questions, Declaration of Independence, and you'll see lots of little, it could be like 1 or 2 sentences from the Declaration of Independence, it could be a longer extract, it just depends, but just become familiar with all of that. Now, if this sounds daunting, if this is making you a little bit worried, don't worry so much. I'm going to give you 5, I think it's 5. Is it 5? I'm going to give you, yes, 5 pieces of advice today that should help you get a higher score in this test. Now, there are hundreds and hundreds of other ideas that I could give you, but these are 5 good ones that, it makes a nice little video. So let's get stuck in. The first idea is don't worry about a lack of memorized knowledge. The GED test in all subjects is not about memorization. It's not about rote learning. Now, what is rote learning and memorization? Well, that's just learning something and then repeating it in a test. So, for example, it might say to you, what year did the Second World War start? And you think, I remember that. We learned that on Thursday. That's 1939. Okay, now that's rote learning, that's memorization. You're just memorizing names and dates and things like that. The GED test for all subjects, and in particular the social studies that we're looking at today, it's not about memorization. Okay, you don't need to remember all this stuff and then repeat it in the test, because all you need to know to get the right answers is on the page already. Okay, now that for some students might think, yes, it's all on the page, I don't have to do any work, it's going to be easy. It's not the case. Okay, if you understand the core concepts of social studies, if you understand the core events of history and of various other things you'll learn, and this gives you a massive advantage when you look at the diagrams or you look at the short paragraphs or the longer paragraphs on the GED test. For example, let's say you get a short paragraph which is about representative democracy. Well, if you don't know what representative democracy is, it's going to be much more difficult to dig beneath the surface and critically evaluate anything within that text, because you don't have the core knowledge, the foundational knowledge. So you'll kind of be guessing or making educated guesses when it comes to your answers. But if you know that concept of representative democracy, you know why it came about and the effects that it has, then the chances are you've a much higher chance of getting the right answer. So in the social studies test itself, you're going to you'll encounter things like American history, geography, economics, civics, government, and other global issues. Okay, now, as I said, you don't need to memorize everything that's in your core textbooks or that's online. But what you do need is kind of an overview of these events. You need a kind of, let's say, a kind of foundational knowledge in the core events of history and of civics and government and things like that. Where do you get these from? Well, one of the easiest places to get them from is from a GED aligned textbook What does that mean? GED aligned textbook means that the publisher of the textbook, for example, the McGraw-Hill GED textbook, they have been in communication with GED testing services and have sent their book to GED testing services, who have checked their publication, their proposal, checked their proposal, and then advised them to change this, change that, change this, change that, so it becomes more aligned or in common with what the GED syllabus is all about. So GED aligned resources it's much more advisable to buy those, as they are rubber stamped by GED testing service themselves, and that they'll be very focused on what you need to know. Okay, I recommend, as I say, the McGraw-Hill one. You get that on, just Google it, any bookshop will have it, Amazon, whatever, and yeah, it works well. Okay, now study what is presented to you carefully, and don't worry if the topic is new to you. This is true. Okay, so as I said, you can work out the answer with what's already on the page. So if a concept comes up that you really haven't any clue about, I don't know, maybe it's fascism, something like that, then just read as closely as you can and try and make as educated a guess as you can. It's probably a good idea to flag questions like that. You can hit a little flag on the computer and then come back to it if you have time at the end. You don't want to waste all your time trying to grapple and struggle and fight with an unknown concept. So give it a little flag and then come back to it at the end if you have a little bit more time left, and see what you can do. Okay, so idea two here is look for trends in charts, data tables, and graphs. Okay, so the data being used in the test is there for you to make a conclusion. What do I mean by that? Well, if you have a line graph or a table of information, there will be a trend in that. So if it's a line graph, it could be a trend over time. So it could be that the consumption of automobiles or whatever increased over the time frame, over the amount of time in the graph, or maybe the consumption of automobiles decreased, or maybe it fluctuated, maybe it went up and down like this. The trend will be quite obvious in the data that they present in the test, and that's because they want you to draw a conclusion from that data. Very often you have to kind of compare and contrast that with information in a paragraph as well. But don't worry, when you see a graph, just don't panic. Approach it step by step. Read above the graph to find out what it's about. Look on the left-hand side, see what that represents. Along the bottom, see what it represents, and then look for that trend and just make a mental note of what the trend is before you do anything else. Okay. A good question to ask you when you look at a graph is, what is this data supposed to show me? What is this data supposed to show me? It's not just there for fun. Okay, it wants you to extract an idea from it, a trend from it. So what is this data supposed to show me? Okay, I get it. The consumption rate was increasing over that period of time. Okay, so make your life easy and look to see what the trend is. Idea 3 is remove choices that are contradicted by the given information. First, okay, what that means is look for opposites. So when you read the question, and you read the text or look at the graphs, whatever, there will be one or two answers that are the direct opposite of what the answer should be. It could be one of these answers, it could be two. It's definitely going to be one. So make sure you look out for these opposites, these contradictions, and then eliminate those immediately. Just put a big line through them. Well, you can't really put a line through it on the computer, but you know what I mean. A mental line, put a mental line through it, and then you've lessened the amount of choices that you have to make. And this works quite well, and many students have come back to me in the past and said, yeah, I find opposites all the time now since you mentioned it. Yeah, well, make sure you look for them too, and you'll increase your score. Idea 4, cause and effect counts for more than names and dates. This is kind of a little bit of a rehash of the idea about memorization. What I do with my students when we do a full social studies course, we make a timeline from the very beginning, going way back to the discovery of the Americas, back to the colonial times. We start our timeline and then we do it date by date by date by date by date as the next part of the course comes up. Now, as each important historical event comes up, Instead of learning the micro details of that historical event, instead of learning everyone's name, everyone's date, everyone's birthday, and everyone's favorite cake or ice cream, whatever it is, we put a little line out from the timeline. One of them says cause, a little line out from that timeline, one of them says effects, and then we write what caused this historical event to happen and what the effects of this historical event were. And this will stand you in much stronger stead in the real test, because they don't want micro details like names and dates. They want to know things like causes and effects. These questions come up very, very often. Okay, so that's a good idea. It's something to think about. You need to get that eagle eye view of history. Okay, you're like a bird swooping in the sky, soaring above the land, and you're looking down upon a historical event. What can you see as a bird looking down from high in the sky? Can you see the micro details? Of course you can't, but you can get an overall idea of what's happening. And that's how you need to approach your learning of history and social studies for this test. Don't panic so much about the micro details. Get that eagle eye view, which you can get from the core aligned textbooks like McGraw-Hill, and then focus on things like what caused this and what the effect was, and what we can infer from events and all the rest of it. Okay, make historical timelines in your notebooks or on a Google Doc, for example, or some other kind of software would be good. The last idea today is learn core conceptual language. Now, this can be a problem for many students who have been out of high school for a long time, or maybe international students who have never studied US civics and government or history. The conceptual language used in the GED social studies test can be quite complicated, especially in civics and government and in the economics test. So in the civics and governments test, you get words like federalism, or you get checks and balances, you get separation of powers, you get, there's just so many concepts that you need to know. I strongly advise that you keep a clear record of these core concepts, and you will see them as you go through the McGraw-Hill textbook. Okay, they're usually highlighted or darkened, the letters are darkened, the concepts are darkened in the text itself. Make a note of these in a Google Doc or in a notebook, and make sure you've got a clear definition of what each one is for each chapter. You can also use, there's lots of tools you can use online for like flashcards and things like this. You can use some of that if you want as well, but I find that Google Documents or your notebook just with the core concept and its definition works just as well, as long as you organize it, chapter by chapter, so it makes sense for you when you come to look back at it. And keep going through all these core concepts and make sure you understand them, because then when they come up in the real test, you can go, aha, okay, no problem. Supply and demand, an economic supply and demand, or whatever else it is, then you can just access that information very quickly and then answer the question more effectively. Okay, and that's about it. They're my 5 ideas today. 5 ideas for success in the GED social studies test. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. There are hundreds and hundreds more, but I hope these give you some kind of help. And if you've got any more questions, you can put them below the video. And yeah, thanks. I'm Teacher Mike from Phuket PALS. Have a good day. Thank you.